The pack banished her for saving a lost pup. They didn't know it was the Alpha King's son. The frost was a thief. It stole the warmth from Alara's threadbare coat, the feeling from her fingertips, and the hope from her heart. In the Blackwood pack, she was less than a ghost. She was an Omega, a wolfless pariah, a living reminder of weakness in a society that worshipped strength. Her existence was a cycle of chilling neglect and sharp-edged cruelty, a life lived in the slivers of space others didn't want. But in the deepest, most secret part of her frozen world, she harbored a fire. A tiny, vulnerable flame she called Leo. He was a lost pup she had found weeks ago near the pack's border, shivering and alone, defying every law of her pack, which dictated that any stray be left to the elements or killed. She had taken him in. Now, as the apocalyptic power of the visiting Alpha King, Kaelin, descended upon their territory, her secret was no longer just a crime. It was a death sentence, for her and the small, innocent life she had sworn to protect. She didn't know that the pup she was shielding was the king's own lost son, the heir to the entire Lycan world, and that her act of forbidden kindness was about to either get her slaughtered or crown her a queen. Alara's world was painted in shades of gray and bitter cold. The shack she called home was more of a suggestion than a structure, its walls thin enough to let the wind whisper its cruelest secrets directly into her ear. Splinters were her constant companions, snagging on the thin wool of her tunic as she huddled for warmth. Hunger was a dull, familiar ache in her belly, a constant reminder of her place at the very bottom of the pack's brutal hierarchy. She was wolfless. In a world defined by the beast within, she possessed none. It was a genetic flaw, a cosmic joke that had rendered her utterly useless in the eyes of the Blackwood pack. Omegas were already the lowest rung, tasked with the most degrading chores, but a wolfless Omega was a blight, a stain on the pack's honor. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled, hauled water from the frozen creek until her arms screamed in protest, and ate only the scraps left after every other wolf had had their fill. Her torment had a name and a face. Lyra, the daughter of their pack's alpha, Marcus. Lyra was everything Alara was not. Beautiful, strong, with a sleek silver wolf that was the pride of her father. She carried her status like a weapon, and Alara was her favorite target. Lyra's cruelty was not just casual, it was inventive, a daily ritual of humiliation designed to grind Alara's spirit into dust. "Look at it, shivering in the corner." Lyra's voice, sharp as broken glass, would often cut through the common hall. "It's a wonder the frost doesn't just shatter her. Such a fragile, pathetic thing." The other wolves would laugh, a chorus of derision that echoed the hollowness inside Alara's chest. Alpha Marcus would watch with a look of cold approval. He believed that crushing the weak was a way to strengthen the pack, and Alara was the weakest of all. His gaze was a physical weight, pressing down on her, reminding her that her life was a privilege he granted, and one he could revoke at any moment. But for the past 6 weeks, Alara had a reason to endure. A secret that warmed her from the inside out, a purpose that gave her the strength to face another day of scorn. His name was Leo. She had found him during a blizzard, a tiny ball of dark fur half buried in a snowdrift at the edge of the forest. He was so small, his whimpers barely audible over the howl of the wind. Pack law was absolute. Strays were a threat, potential spies or carriers of disease. They were to be killed on sight or driven out. To help one was treason. Alara had looked at the shivering pup, his wide, terrified eyes meeting hers, and the law had crumbled into meaningless words. She saw not a threat, but a reflection of her own desperate loneliness. In that moment, her own survival became secondary. She had scooped him up, hiding him beneath her threadbare coat, his small body a warm, trembling weight against her own. She had smuggled him back to her shack, a feat that had sent adrenaline coursing through her veins like liquid fire. She fed him her own meager rations, tearing off pieces of stale bread and soaking them in water. He was a quiet pup, preternaturally so, as if he understood the need for silence. He had a strange marking on his shoulder, a swirl of fur that was a shade lighter than the rest of his coat, almost like a birthmark. His eyes were a startling, intelligent gold. He was her anchor. The quiet moments spent with him in the dark, his soft snores the only sound in her ramshackle hut, were the only moments she felt truly alive. He would lick the tears from her face when the day's cruelty became too much, his small, warm tongue a balm on her soul. Protecting him became her entire world. She was chaining a hurricane inside a glass jar, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the glass was about to break. The inciting incident arrived on the back of a breathless messenger from a neighboring pack. He burst into their territory, his wolf heaving, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "The Alpha King!" he had gasped out in the main square, his words addressed to a stunned Alpha Marcus. "King Kalen is on a tour of the Northern Territories. He will be here in 2 days. He demands a full pack assembly upon his arrival." A wave of shocked silence washed over the assembled wolves. The Alpha King. Kalen the Unforgiving. Kalen, the Widow King. He was a figure of myth and terror, an alpha of alphas, whose power was said to be apocalyptic. He ruled the continent with an iron fist, his grief for his murdered mate and lost son having carved him into a man of granite and sorrow. No king had visited their remote territory in a century. For the others, it was a terrifying honor. For Alara, it was a death knell. A full pack assembly meant every member, every dwelling would be under his scrutiny. There was no hiding, there was no escape. Her secret, her precious Leo, would be discovered. And when he was, Alpha Marcus would not hesitate to make an example of her. He would drag her and the pup before the legendary king and execute her for treason. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull fog of her daily misery. She looked down at her hands, raw and red from scrubbing. She had saved a life, and for that, she was about to lose her own. The frost was no longer just a thief of warmth. It was the herald of her end. The air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation and fear. The entire Blackwood pack was in a state of manic energy, cleaning the grounds, preparing a feast they couldn't afford, and sharpening their claws, as if his visit were both an honor and an imminent attack. Alara was worked harder than ever, scrubbing the great hall's flagstones until they gleamed, her body a single, throbbing ache. Every command from Lyra was laced with a new, vicious excitement. "Hurry up, you worthless thing!" Lyra had sneered, kicking a bucket of dirty water near Alara's feet. "The king will be here soon. We can't have your filth stinking up the place when my father presents me to him." The implication was clear. Lyra, like every other ambitious she-wolf in the kingdom, saw the widowed king as the ultimate prize. Alara ignored her, her thoughts a frantic storm. How could she hide Leo? A full assembly meant every wolf would be accounted for. Leaving him in the shack was too risky. Someone might be sent to search the Omega quarters. Taking him with her was impossible. The day of the king's arrival dawned with an unnerving stillness. The sky was a sheet of pewter, heavy and oppressive. A scent preceded him, rolling into their valley like a tidal wave. It was a scent of raw, untamed power, of ozone after a lightning strike, of ancient forests and cold stone. It was the scent of command, and it forced every wolf in the pack, including Alpha Marcus, to instinctively lower their heads in submission. Then he appeared at the edge of the clearing and the world held its breath. King Kalen was not a man. He was a monument to power and grief. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His face was all harsh angles and brutal beauty, as if carved from granite by a merciless sculptor. A scar, pale and thin, cut through one dark eyebrow. But his eyes were what captured and held every gaze. They were the color of molten gold, glowing with an inner light that spoke of an ancient lethal power. They were the eyes of a king who had seen the end of his world and had decided to rule over the ashes. Beside him stood a calmer but no less formidable presence. Beta Valerius, his second in command, a wolf whose loyalty was as legendary as the king's power. He scanned the assembled pack with sharp, intelligent eyes, missing nothing. Ilara was at the very back of the assembly, hidden behind the other Omegas, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had made a desperate choice. Leo was nestled inside the front of her coat, wrapped in a scrap of wool. He was unnaturally still, as if sensing the immense danger. She prayed to a moon goddess she wasn't sure she believed in, praying that his scent would be masked by the sheer number of wolves, by the overwhelming power signature of the king himself. Alpha Marcus stepped forward, his own considerable presence seeming diminished, almost pathetic, before the king. He bowed low, his voice strained. Alpha King Kalen, it is an honor to welcome you to the Blackwood Pack. Kalen's golden eyes swept over him, unimpressed. He did not speak. He simply began to walk, his gaze passing over the rows of tense, submissive wolves. It was an inspection, a silent assessment of strength and loyalty. His stare felt like a physical weight, and more than one warrior flinched as it passed over them. Ilara kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the frozen mud at her feet. Don't see me. Don't see me. Don't see me. The chant was a frantic prayer in her mind, but fate was a cruel and capricious thing. As the king drew nearer, a commotion broke out at the front. Lyra, ever the opportunist, had chosen this moment to make her move. She accidentally stumbled, falling not towards her father, but towards the king. It was a clumsy, obvious ploy for attention. In the ensuing scuffle to help her up, an Omega near Ilara was shoved backward. He stumbled into her, hard. Ilara gasped, her arms flying out to steady herself. The front of her coat gaped open for a split second. It was all it took. King Kalen had been about to pass her, his gaze already moving on. But at that exact moment a tiny, almost imperceptible scent hit him. It was faint, hidden beneath layers of fear and cheap soap and wood smoke. But it was there. The unique, irreplaceable scent of his own bloodline, the scent of his son. He stopped. The entire world seemed to stop with him. The air grew thick, heavy with an unspeakable tension. His head snapped towards Ilara, his golden eyes narrowing into slits of pure predatory focus. He had been a bored king a moment ago. Now he was a hunter who had just caught the scent of his long-lost prey. Ilara's blood turned to ice. He was looking at her. Not through her, not past her, but directly at her. And then the mate bond, dormant and unknown, detonated between them. For Kalen, it was a cataclysm. Through the impossible scent of his son, another scent bloomed, a fragrance of wild heather, winter snow, and unshakable resilience. It was the scent the moon goddess had woven into his very soul, the scent of his fated mate. His wolf, a beast of apocalyptic rage and sorrow that had slumbered in grief for 5 years, roared to life within him. It screamed a single possessive, incredulous word. Mine. For Ilara, it was a bolt of lightning to the soul. A dizzying, magnetic pull slammed into her, a force so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. It was a sense of coming home to a place she had never been, a feeling of recognition for a man she had never seen. A warmth, fierce and terrifying, flooded her, chasing away the perpetual cold for the first time in her life. She stared at the fearsome king, her terror mingling with a profound, soul-deep confusion. He took a step towards her. The hunt had begun. He didn't know how or why, but the pathetic, shivering Omega at the back of the crowd was inexplicably tied to the two most important things in his universe: his lost son and his fated mate. And he would tear the world apart to get the answers. Kalen's focus was absolute, a lethal beam of energy directed solely at Ilara. The rest of the world, the pack, the trees, the sky, faded into a meaningless gray blur. His wolf was a raging inferno in his chest, clawing for control, demanding he seize what was his. Mate. Pup. Mine. The dual revelations were warring inside him, a paradox of impossible joy and rising murderous fury. He moved. Each step was deliberate, silent, the tread of a predator closing in. The assembled wolves of the Blackwood pack held their collective breath, a tangible wave of fear rolling off them. They could feel the shift in their king. The air, already thick with his power, now vibrated with a barely controlled violence that promised annihilation. Alara was frozen, trapped in the golden blaze of his eyes. The magnetic pull was stronger now, a physical cord tightening between them. Her mind screamed at her to run, to disappear, but her body was locked in place, swayed by a power she couldn't comprehend. The tiny bundle in her coat shifted, and a fresh spike of terror lanced through her. Alpha Marcus, oblivious to the true nature of the unfolding drama, saw only his king focusing on the pack's most worthless member. He saw an insult. Humiliation burned in his gut. He stepped forward, intending to intercept. "My king," Marcus began, his voice tight with strained deference. "This is nothing. A wolfless Omega. She is of no importance." Kalen didn't even glance at him. He raised a single hand, a gesture of casual, absolute authority. "Move." The single word was not a request. It was an alpha command, imbued with a power so immense that it struck Marcus like a physical blow. The Blackwood Alpha, a formidable wolf in his own right, found his body obeying before his mind could even process the command. He stumbled back, his throat tight with a submission he hadn't felt since he was a pup. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Lyra watched, her face a mask of disbelief and burgeoning jealousy. The king, her king, was ignoring her powerful alpha father for that? For the pack's dirt stain? The injustice was a bitter pill. Her eyes narrowed, and a cruel, desperate idea began to form in her mind. If the king was for some reason interested in the Omega, Lyra would show him exactly what a pathetic, rule-breaking creature she truly was. Kalen came to a stop directly in front of Alara. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The scent of him was overwhelming, filling her senses, making her feel dizzy and strangely safe, a contradiction that her terrified mind couldn't reconcile. "What are you hiding?" His voice was a low growl, a rumble that vibrated deep in her bones. It was not a question of idle curiosity. It was a demand for the truth he could already smell. Ilara's throat was too dry to speak. She shook her head, a small, desperate gesture of denial. She clutched her coat tighter, her knuckles white. It was then that Lyra saw her chance. With a vicious sneer, she strode forward, breaking the terrified paralysis of the crowd. "I'll show you what she's hiding, my king," she cried, her voice dripping with venomous righteousness. "She's a traitor, a filthy stray sympathizer." Before anyone could react, Lyra lunged. She didn't go for Alara. She went for the bundle in her coat. Her clawed hand shot out, grabbing the fabric and ripping it open. "She's been hoarding food and harboring a stray pup against pack law," Lyra shrieked, triumphant. The scrap of wool fell away. Leo, small and dark-furred, was exposed to the cold air and the 100 pairs of shocked eyes. Frightened by the sudden movement and Lyra's shrill voice, the pup let out a panicked yelp. It was a sound that shattered the world. To the Blackwood pack, it was just the cry of a stray. But to Kalen, it was a ghost's whisper. It was the sound he heard in his darkest nightmares, the sound he had thought forever silenced 5 years ago in a storm of blood and fire. The king went utterly still. His golden eyes, which had been burning with possessive focus on Alara, now dropped to the tiny creature nestled against her chest. He saw the swirl of lighter fur on the pup's shoulder, the unmistakable shape of the royal sigil of his bloodline. He saw the face, a miniature, perfect echo of his murdered mate. The grief and rage he had carried for 5 years exploded. It was not a slow burn. It was a detonation. The air around him dropped 20 degrees. The ground beneath his feet cracked as a wave of pure, apocalyptic power rolled off him like a physical shockwave. Wolves in the front rows cried out and stumbled back, their instincts screaming at them to flee from the presence of a god's wrath. Beta Valerius's eyes widened in horror and dawning understanding. Leo, he breathed, the name a ghost on his lips. Kalen's head lifted, and the look he gave Lyra was not one of anger. It was a look of pure cosmic annihilation. She had not just accosted his fated mate. She had laid a hand on his son, his living, breathing son. Lyra's triumphant smirk dissolved into a mask of stark terror. The sheer force of his killing intent was suffocating her, pressing in on her from all sides. She finally understood that she had not exposed a crime. She had stumbled into a holy sanctum and desecrated it. Alpha Marcus stared, his mind refusing to connect the dots. A stray pup, the king's fury, the royal sigil. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a guillotine. His blood ran cold. His daughter, in her petty jealousy, had just signed their death warrant. Ilara, at the epicenter of the storm, felt the king's cataclysmic rage wash over her, but miraculously, not a single drop of it was directed at her. It was a shield around her, a wall of fury protecting her and the pup she held. With a speed that defied physics, Kalen's hand shot out. He didn't touch Lyra. He grabbed the front of Alpha Marcus's tunic, lifting the powerful Alpha clear off the ground with one hand. Marcus dangled, kicking uselessly, his face turning purple. "You!" Kalen snarled, his voice no longer human. It was the sound of grinding rock and breaking worlds. "You allowed this. In your territory. Under your watch." He turned his head slowly, his molten gold eyes falling back to Ilara. The feral rage in them softened, replaced by an emotion so profound, so raw, it was breathtaking. It was awe. It was reverence. It was the look of a man who had been handed back his entire universe. Gently, with a tenderness that was a stark contrast to the violence he was currently inflicting on her Alpha, he reached for the pup. His large, calloused hands were impossibly careful as he took Leo from Ilara's arms. He held his son, his lost heir, against his chest, burying his face in the pup's dark fur. A shudder racked his massive frame, a single, silent sob of a grief so deep it had nearly broken him, and a joy so fierce it was remaking him. He looked at Ilara over the top of his son's head. Her scent, the scent of his mate, was all over the pup. She hadn't harmed him. She had protected him. She had fed him from her own scarce food. She had kept him warm with her own body heat. This wolfless, abused, terrified Omega had done what his entire network of spies and warriors could not. She had saved his son. He let go of Marcus, who collapsed to the ground, gasping and choking. Then, before the eyes of the stunned and terrified Blackwood pack, before the disbelieving gaze of Lyra and her father, Alpha King Kalen, the most powerful Lycan on the planet, did the unthinkable. Holding his heir in one arm, he went down on one knee before the shivering, wolfless Omega. He bowed his head. "You saved my son." His voice was thick with emotion, but it carried across the silent clearing. "You protected my bloodline. You are my mate." He looked up, his golden eyes blazing with a vow that was as sacred as it was possessive. "And you are my queen." The silence that followed was absolute, a void of pure, unadulterated shock. The world had just been turned upside down, and Ilara was standing at its new, terrifying center. The collective gasp of the Blackwood pack was a single, unified sound of disbelief. It was as if the sky had just announced it was turning green. Their king, a figure more myth than man, was kneeling. Kneeling in the mud and frost before the lowest of the low, the pack's punching bag, the wolfless Omega Ilara. Lyra's face had gone from triumphant to terrified to a ghastly, bloodless white. Her mind, fueled by arrogance and jealousy, simply couldn't process the scene. The Omega. A queen? It was a joke. It had to be a mistake. But the look in the king's eyes was no joke. It was a declaration of fact, as immutable as the rising of the moon. Alpha Marcus, still gasping for air on the ground, stared with wide, horrified eyes. He had spent years cultivating a culture of brutal strength, where Ilara represented everything he despised. Now, that symbol of weakness was being elevated above all others by the ultimate arbiter of power. His entire worldview, his very authority, was disintegrating before his eyes. Ilara stood frozen, the king's words echoing in the sudden vast silence of her mind. My son, my mate, my queen. The concepts were too large, too world-altering for her to grasp. She felt like a fragile piece of glass trying to contain the force of a tidal wave. The man before her, this demigod of fury and power, was looking at her with a reverence she had never seen in anyone's eyes, let alone the king's. Kalen rose to his feet, the movement fluid and majestic, his son still held securely in the crook of his arm. Leo, no longer afraid, seemed to recognize the scent and feel of his father, nuzzling contentedly against the king's chest. Kalen's gaze swept over the pack, and the rage returned, now a cold, controlled fire. For 5 years I have mourned, his voice boomed, each word a hammer blow of judgment. I believed my son, Prince Leonidas, died with his mother in a cowardly ambush. I find him alive, not in the care of a noble house, but freezing and starved, protected only by the courage of this one wolf. His eyes locked onto Ilara, and the warmth returned to them, a stark contrast to the icy fury he directed at everyone else. A wolf your alpha called nothing. A wolf his daughter assaulted. He took a step, placing himself partially in front of Ilara, a living shield of royal power. He turned his lethal gaze back to Marcus and Lyra, who were now trembling uncontrollably. "Beta Valerius," Kalen commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft tone. "My king," Valerius replied instantly, stepping forward. "Take my mate and my son to the Alpha's lodge. Place a royal guard on the door. No one enters. No one leaves. See to her every comfort. Find her food, warmth, anything she desires." He looked at Ilara, a silent question in his eyes. Ilara, finding her voice for the first time, spoke in a whisper that was barely audible. The lodge? That was Alpha Marcus's home, a place she had only ever scrubbed the floors of, a place she was forbidden from even looking at for too long. "It is my temporary quarter," Kalen stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And therefore, it is yours. You will never be cold or hungry again. I swear it." He looked at Valerius. "Go. Now." Valerius bowed his head. "This way, Luna," he said, his voice respectful. He used the formal title for a Pax mated female leader, and the word sent another shockwave through the onlookers. He gently guided a stunned Ilara away from the center of the clearing. As she walked, Ilara felt hundreds of eyes on her back, a mixture of awe, terror, and raw, burning hatred from Lyra. She was being led from her life of squalor into a world of impossible luxury, but it felt less like a rescue and more like being swept up in a hurricane. Once Ilara and the pup were safely on their way, Kalen turned his full, undivided attention back to the terrified pack and its disgraced leaders. The temperature seemed to drop again. "Now," he said, the single word promising a world of pain. "We will have a tribunal, here, in the mud that you forced my queen to walk on." He pointed a commanding finger at Marcus and Lyra. "Bring them to the center." The king's personal guards, warriors of immense size and power, moved instantly. They hauled Marcus and Lyra to their feet and dragged them back to the spot where Ilara had stood moments before. "On your knees," Kalen commanded. The order was absolute. The Alpha and his daughter crumpled as if their legs had been cut out from under them. "You," Kalen snarled, looming over Marcus. "You fostered a pack that abuses the weak, that punishes kindness. You starved the one person who had the decency to save a child. You called her worthless." Marcus was shaking his head, his face a mess of tears and panicked denial. "I didn't know, my king, I swear. If I had known it was the prince." "It should not matter." Kalen's roar silenced him, A pup is a pup, an innocent. Your laws are barbaric, and you are a disgrace to the title of Alpha. He then turned to Lyra, who was openly weeping, her carefully constructed facade of superiority shattered into a million pieces. And you laid your hands on my mate. You tore open her coat, not to expose a crime, but out of petty, pathetic jealousy. His voice became a whisper, more terrifying than any shout. You threatened my son. Please, Lyra sobbed. Mercy, my king, please. Mercy? Kaelin echoed the word as if it were a foreign concept. Did you show her mercy when you tormented her day after day? Did you show mercy when you called for the death of a pup you had not even seen? You will receive the same mercy you gave. He looked out at the silent, horrified faces of the Blackwood pack. There is a new order. The old ways of this pack are dead. Your alpha has failed you. His bloodline has proven corrupt. He made his judgment, his voice ringing with the finality of an executioner. For the crimes of gross negligence, abuse of power, and endangering the royal heir, I, Kaelin, Alpha King, sentence you, Marquess of Blackwood, to be stripped of your title and your wolf. You will live out your days as a wolfless slave in the deepest mines of the North. A collective gasp. To strip an alpha of his wolf was a fate worse than death. As for you, Lyra, he continued, his gaze on her pitiless, for assaulting the Queen Luna and threatening the Crown Prince, you are sentenced to death. It will be carried out at dawn. Lyra let out a single piercing shriek of despair before dissolving into incoherent begging. The power shift was complete. It was brutal, swift, and absolute. In the span of 20 minutes, Alara had gone from Omega to Queen, and her tormentors had been cast down into oblivion. The king had not just validated her, he had burned down her entire world and was promising to build her a new one from the ashes. The Alpha's lodge was a world away from her shack. Where her home had been splinters and drafts, this was polished dark wood and roaring fires. Thick furs were draped over every chair, and the air smelled of beeswax and pine, not damp and despair. Valerius had led her to the master suite, the king's chambers, and left her with a quiet promise that she was safe. Alara stood in the center of the vast room, feeling small and out of place. Leo, seemingly exhausted by the day's events, was curled asleep on a mountain of velvet pillows on the enormous bed. A tray of food sat on a nearby table. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and fruit. It was more food than she had seen in a month. Her stomach growled, but she couldn't bring herself to eat. Her mind was still reeling, trying to catch up with the violent, jarring shift in her reality. The door opened, and Kaelin entered. He had removed his heavy outer cloak, and in the softer light of the fire, he seemed slightly less like a god of war and more like a man. A very large, very dangerous man. He saw her standing there, looking lost and frightened, and the hard lines of his face softened. "You should eat," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Alara flinched at the sound, a lifetime of conditioning making her brace for a command or an insult. When none came, she simply stared at him, her heart still beating a frantic rhythm. He seemed to understand. He didn't move closer, giving her space. "I know this is a lot to process." He gestured vaguely around the room. "Ilara, that is your name, is it not?" She managed a small nod. "Ilara," he repeated, tasting the name. "My mate's name is Ilara." A small, sad smile touched his lips for a fleeting moment. "The moon goddess has a strange sense of humor. For 5 years I have been a ghost. My first mate, Lyra, forgive the irony of the name, was murdered. We were traveling through the Greyfang Mountains when our convoy was ambushed. It was a massacre. They were ruthless, targeting the guards, the healers, her." His voice grew thick with remembered pain. "I was fighting on the other side of the pass. By the time I felt the mate bond sever, by the time I got to her, it was too late. She was gone. And Leo, he was just a babe. We searched the wreckage for days. We found his blanket, torn and bloodied, near a cliff's edge. We assumed, we assumed the worst, that he had been taken or had fallen. He looked at the sleeping pup on the bed, his golden eyes filled with a universe of pain and love. I never let myself hope. Hope was a poison I couldn't afford. My grief became my armor. I ruled, I conquered, I expanded my territories, all to fill the void she left behind. And then today, he finally looked back at her, his gaze intense. I came here for a routine inspection, bored and empty, and I found everything I had lost. And more. He took a careful step closer. The bond that snapped when Lyra died. The goddess has given me a second chance. With you. It's a rare gift. Almost unheard of. A second fated mate. And you. You were the guardian of the one piece of my past I thought was gone forever. Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she listened. His pain was a palpable thing, a force that reached across the room and resonated with her own lifetime of suffering. I just found him in the snow, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He was so small, I couldn't leave him. You defied your pack, your alpha, your laws, all for a nameless stray pup, Kaelin said, his voice filled with awe. You have more courage and honor in your little finger than that entire pack has combined. You are not weak, Alara. You were a diamond being crushed under rocks, but you never broke. He closed the distance between them then, moving slowly, cautiously, as one would approach a frightened fawn. He stopped just before her, his immense height dwarfing her. He didn't touch her. He simply looked down at her, his golden eyes searching her face. I will not hurt you, he said softly. I will never let anyone hurt you again. Marcus and his daughter will face their judgment. This pack will be reformed under a new alpha, one loyal to the crown and its queen. He hesitated, then slowly raised his hand. He didn't touch her skin. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch as light as a feather. The simple, non-threatening gesture was more intimate than anything Alara had ever experienced. The mate bond flared between them, a current of warmth and rightness that made her gasp. You are my queen now, he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, finally making contact. Her skin tingled at the touch. You will have everything: respect, power, a home, a family. He looked from her to his sleeping son. Our family. The word hung in the air between them, filled with promise and a terrifying new reality. Queen, mate, mother to a prince. It was too much. Overwhelmed, Alara felt her knees buckle. Kaelin caught her instantly, his strong arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his solid chest. She was enveloped in his scent, his warmth, his sheer power. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly, completely safe. She buried her face in his tunic and, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to weep. Not from pain or despair, but from a dizzying, terrifying, beautiful hope. He simply held her, a silent, unshakable mountain protecting her from the storm. The next day was a blur of monumental changes. While Alara remained in the protected sanctuary of the lodge, the king's justice was enacted with brutal efficiency. The Blackwood pack was assembled once more, this time not for an inspection, but for a revolution. Kaelin stood before them, not as a visiting monarch, but as their absolute ruler. He did not ask Alara to attend the sentencing, shielding her from the grim proceedings, but word of it reached her through a quiet, respectful she-wolf, one of the king's royal guard, who had been assigned as her attendant. Lyra was brought out at dawn. Her pleas for mercy had fallen on deaf ears. Her execution was swift, a stark and brutal message to all who would dare threaten the royal family. There was no ceremony, only the cold finality of the king's law. Alpha Marcus's fate was, in many ways, crueler. He was dragged before the pack he had once ruled with an iron fist. Kaelin himself performed the ceremony, a dark and ancient ritual. He placed his hand on Marcus's head and spoke the words that severed the connection between the man and his inner wolf. The pack watched in horrified silence as their once powerful alpha screamed, his body convulsing as his very essence was torn from him. When it was over, he was just a man, hollowed out, broken, and wolfless. He was hauled away in chains, destined for a life of hard labor in the darkness of the northern mines, a living testament to the king's wrath. With the old regime shattered, Kalen appointed a new alpha from among the Blackwood warriors, a stern but fair wolf who had shown no part in Alara's torment. His first command from the king was to abolish the law regarding strays and to ensure the Omegas were treated with the respect due to any pack member. The hierarchy of cruelty was dismantled in a single morning. Later that day, Kalen came to Alara. He found her by the window, watching the snow fall, with Leo playing at her feet with a small wooden toy a guard had carved for him. She was dressed not in her old rags, but in a simple but warm gown of deep blue wool that had been found for her. The color brought out the light in her eyes. "It is done," he said quietly from the doorway. Ilara turned, her expression unreadable. She felt no joy at their fate, only a profound sense of sorrow for a life so twisted by hate that it could only end in ruin. "They are gone?" "They are," he confirmed. "Their poison has been purged from this pack." He walked towards her, his presence filling the room. "We will leave in the morning. We return to the capital, to Eldoria, to your new home." The capital. A city she had only heard of in whispers, a place of mythic proportions where the Alpha King ruled from a throne of obsidian. The idea was terrifying. Here, she was a queen because he declared it. There, among the ancient noble houses and powerful alphas of the court, what would she be? They would see her as she saw herself, a wolfless Omega who got lucky. As if reading her thoughts, Kalen stopped before her and gently took her hands in his. They were still raw and chapped, but he held them as if they were the most precious jewels. "Do not be afraid," he murmured, his golden eyes searching hers. "Your past does not define you. Your heart does. Your courage does. In Eldoria, you will not be just my mate. You will be their queen. They will see the strength I see. And if they do not—" His voice hardened, a hint of the feral king returning. "Then they will learn to." His conviction was a powerful force, a shield against her own doubts. She wanted to believe him. She looked down at their joined hands, her small, scarred ones lost in his large, powerful grasp. "I don't know how to be a queen," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I only know how to be invisible." "I will teach you," he promised. "And you will teach me. You will teach me how to be a father again. You will teach me how to feel something other than grief." He raised one of her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You have already brought the sun back into my life, Ilara. You and Leo." The sincerity in his voice, the raw emotion in his eyes, chipped away at the wall of fear around her heart. For the first time, she didn't just feel like a victim of circumstance swept up in a king's decree. She felt chosen, seen. That night, she ate the meal prepared for her, the flavors exploding on her tongue, a symbol of her new life. She played with Leo until he fell asleep, his happy, sleepy sighs a balm to her soul. When she finally climbed into the massive bed, its soft linens felt like a cloud. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing with anxiety. But instead, a strange sense of peace settled over her. She was safe. Leo was safe. The monsters of her past were gone. A new, terrifying future awaited, but she would not face it alone. She would face it with a king at her side, a prince in her care, and a strange, powerful bond humming in her soul. For the first time in her entire life, Ilara felt the faint, flickering beginnings of hope. And as she drifted off to sleep, she realized the frost could no longer touch her here. The journey to Eldoria was a revelation. They traveled in a heavily guarded royal carriage, a magnificent vehicle of dark wood and gilded steel, drawn by 6 powerful horses. Inside, it was lined with velvet and fur, a moving fortress of warmth and luxury. For Alara, who had never traveled more than a few miles from her own pack's lands, every new vista was a marvel. They passed through dense forests, across wide, rolling plains, and over towering mountain passes. Kalen was a constant, reassuring presence at her side. He pointed out landmarks, told her the history of the lands they passed, and explained the complex political web of the kingdom she was about to enter. He spoke of the Great Council, the collection of the most powerful alphas who advised him, and of the noble houses whose lineage stretched back centuries. Some, he warned, would be loyal. Others would see her as a threat to their own ambitions. One name he mentioned with a particular edge in his voice was Lord Vorlag of House Volkov. "He is the head of the council," Kalen explained, his hand resting possessively on Alara's knee as Leo slept between them. "He was my father's most trusted advisor. He has been a constant source of stability in the court, especially after Lyra died. But he is a creature of tradition and power. He will be the most difficult to win over." Alara listened, trying to absorb it all, her anxiety a low hum beneath the surface. She spent hours just watching Kalen with his son. The fearsome king, whose name made warriors tremble, was endlessly patient and gentle with Leo. He would let the pup tug on his hair, would make funny faces that drew out squeals of delighted laughter, and would tell him stories of ancient wolf heroes in a low, rumbling voice until the boy drifted to sleep in his arms. Seeing this side of him, the father, and not just the king, did more to calm Alara's fears than any promise of protection. It made the demigod human. Their arrival in Eldoria was on a scale she could not have imagined. The capital city was carved into the heart of a mountain, a breathtaking testament to Lycan engineering and power. Towers of white stone reached for the sky, connected by elegant bridges. Waterfalls cascaded down the mountainside, their spray catching the light and creating perpetual rainbows. The entire city seemed to glow with an inner light. As their carriage passed through the great gates, citizens lined the streets. They did not cheer. They watched in a silent, profound curiosity, their eyes fixed on the carriage that held their long-lost prince and their mysterious new queen. The weight of their collective gaze was immense. The palace itself was a fortress of obsidian and silver that seemed to grow out of the very peak of the mountain. It was vast, imposing, and magnificent. When the carriage stopped, Kalen stepped out first. Then he turned and offered his hand to Alara. Taking a deep breath, she took it. As she stepped out of the carriage into the grand courtyard, a hush fell over the assembled court. They were all there, dozens of alphas and their mates, nobles and council members, all dressed in opulent finery. Their faces were a mixture of shock, speculation, and thinly veiled disdain. She could feel their eyes cataloging her simple dress, her plain features, her lack of a powerful aura. She was exactly what they saw. A nobody. And then Kalen lifted Leo from the carriage and settled him on his hip. He placed his other arm firmly around Alara's waist, pulling her to his side. He presented them not as separate entities, but as a single, unbreakable unit. An elderly, imposing wolf with silver-streaked dark hair and cold, calculating eyes stepped forward from the crowd. He was dressed in robes of deep crimson, signifying his high rank. Alara knew instantly this was Lord Vorlag. "My king," Vorlag said, his voice smooth and polished, but lacking any real warmth. He bowed his head, a perfect courtly gesture. "You return with miracles." His gaze flickered to Leo, then to Alara, and his eyes held a complex, unreadable expression. It was not joy. It was closer to the look of a man whose careful calculations had just been thrown into chaos. "I return with my son. And my queen," Kalen stated, his voice ringing with authority. He left no room for interpretation. Vorlag's lips thinned almost imperceptibly. "The court rejoices at the return of the prince, and we are eager to welcome your new Luna." The word eager was laden with unspoken reservations. He was speaking for the entire court, and the message was clear. You, the Omega, are not welcome here. The tension in the courtyard was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ilara felt a tremor of her old fear return. These were not simple pack bullies like Lyra. These were powerful, dangerous political animals, and she was an intruder in their jungle. She instinctively pressed closer to Kaylin's side, her hand resting on Leo's back. That night, in the sprawling royal suite that was to be her new home, the first true challenge arrived. Kaylin had been called away to an urgent council meeting, a meeting Vorlag had insisted upon to discuss the ramifications of these new developments. Ilara was left with only her new handmaiden and a pair of royal guards outside her door. She was putting a tired Leo to bed in his own adjoining room, a beautiful chamber filled with toys and soft furs, when she felt it. A subtle shift in the air, a wrongness. The instincts that had kept her alive for years in the Blackwood pack screamed a silent warning. She moved to the door of Leo's room, peering back into the main suite. It was empty. The fire crackled in the hearth. But the silence felt heavy, watchful. Then she saw them. Shadows detaching themselves from the deeper shadows of the room. 3 figures, dressed in black, their faces masked. They moved with a silent, deadly grace. Assassins. Panic seized her, cold and absolute. They hadn't made a sound. The royal guards outside hadn't raised an alarm. This was a professional, inside job. Her first and only thought was Leo. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't run. But she could buy time. As the assassins advanced towards Leo's room, Ilara did the only thing she could. She stepped out from the doorway, placing herself directly in their path. "Stop," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The lead assassin paused, surprised. He likely expected her to be cowering in a corner. He let out a low, mocking chuckle. "The little Omega Queen thinks she can give orders." "You will not touch him," Ilara said, her body shaking but her resolve hardening into steel. She was no longer just Ilara, the victim. She was a mother protecting her child. She was a mate protecting her king's heir. A primal protective instinct she never knew she possessed rose up within her. "A noble sentiment," the assassin sneered. "But Lord Vorlag is very clear. The line of succession must be corrected. The king's grief has made him foolish. A wolfless Omega and a boy of questionable parentage cannot be allowed to disrupt the stability of the kingdom." Vorlag. The name confirmed her worst fears. This was not a random attack. It was a coup. The assassins moved to flank her. Ilara backed away slowly, keeping herself between them and Leo's door. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, for any advantage. She saw a heavy silver candlestick on a nearby table. As one of the assassins lunged, she didn't scream. She didn't cower. She reacted. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, she grabbed the heavy candlestick and swung it with all her might. The blow connected with the side of the assassin's head with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, surprised by the ferocity of the attack from the pathetic Omega. It didn't stop him, but it bought her a precious second. It was all Kaylin needed. The doors to the suite exploded inward, blasted off their hinges by a wave of pure force. Kaylin stood there, a figure of apocalyptic fury. His council meeting had been a ruse, a way to draw him out. He had felt the spike of Ilara's fear through the mate bond, a psychic scream of terror that had sent him hurtling back to the suite. His golden eyes took in the scene in an instant. The assassins, the weapon in Ilara's hand, her defiant, terrified stance in front of his son's room. The rage that had leveled the Blackwood pack was nothing compared to the inferno he unleashed now. He didn't speak. He didn't roar. He simply became death. He moved like a blur, a whirlwind of claws and fury. The fight was not a fight. It was a slaughter. The assassins, highly trained killers, were torn apart in seconds, their bodies thrown across the room like broken dolls. When it was over, Kaylin stood panting in the center of the ruined suite, his knuckles dripping with blood. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the architect of the betrayal was still at large. He turned to Ilara, his rage vanishing, replaced by frantic concern. He rushed to her side, his hands hovering over her, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No," she breathed, her legs finally giving way. The candlestick clattered to the floor. He caught her, holding her tight against him. "I'm okay. Leo is safe." He held her for a long moment, his heart hammering against his chest. She had fought. She had stood her ground, armed with nothing but a piece of silver and a mother's courage, against trained killers. His awe for her grew tenfold. Then, a cold, lethal calm settled over him. He looked past her, towards the door to the council chambers across the palace. "Valerius," he said, his voice deadly soft. His beta was already there, having followed him from the meeting. "My king. Seal the palace. No one leaves. Bring the entire council to the throne room. Now." He looked down at Alara, his golden eyes burning with a promise of absolute vengeance. "And bring me Lord Vorlag." The final challenge had been made, and the king was about to provide the final bloody answer. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the tall, arched windows of the royal suite, casting long fingers of light across the polished marble floor. Alara stood on the balcony, a soft breeze rustling the silk of her deep emerald gown. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow from the mountain peaks that ringed the city of Eldoria. She was no longer the shivering, haunted girl from the Blackwood Pack. The perpetual fear that had been her shadow for so long had been replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. Her hair, once dull and lifeless, now shone with health, cascading down her back in dark waves. She was still wolfless, but she had learned that true strength was not about the beast within, but about the resolve in one's heart. She was a queen, not just by the king's decree, but by her own merit. The court had learned this the hard way. After Vorlag's failed assassination attempt, Kaelin had descended upon the conspirators with a righteous fury that had shaken the kingdom to its core. Lord Vorlag, dragged before the throne, had confessed everything. He admitted to orchestrating the original ambush that had killed Kaelin's first mate, intending to destabilize the throne for his own gain. He had believed Leo to be dead, and Alara's arrival had been an unforeseen complication he had moved to correct. His trial was swift, his execution public. His co-conspirators on the council were exiled, their houses stripped of their titles and lands. Kaelin, with Alara at his side, had rebuilt the council with younger, more loyal alphas who valued honor above ambition. Alara herself had been instrumental in the process. During the tribunals, she had spoken not with rage, but with a quiet, firm wisdom, her insights into the nature of cruelty and ambition earning her the grudging respect of even the most hardened traditionalists. They had expected a weak, simpering Omega. They found a queen with a spine of steel. The sound of small feet pattering on the floor pulled her from her reverie. Leo, now a sturdy, confident toddler, ran onto the balcony and wrapped his arms around her legs. "Mama," he chirped, his golden eyes, so like his father's, sparkling with joy. Alara smiled and scooped him into her arms, pressing a kiss to his dark hair. "Good morning, my little prince." The word mama no longer felt strange on his lips. It felt like the most natural sound in the world. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into the solid, familiar warmth of Kaelin's chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze following hers out over the sprawling city below. "What is my queen thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I was thinking about the frost," she answered softly. "How I used to believe it was the cruelest thing in the world, how it used to be all I knew." Kaelin's arms tightened around her. "There is no frost here, my love. Not for you. Never again." He turned her in his arms, his golden eyes searching her face, still filled with the same awe he'd had that first day in the muddy clearing. The mate bond between them was a living thing, a constant, comforting thrum of love, devotion, and shared strength. He had taught her about politics and power, and she had taught him how to laugh again. She had healed the gaping wound in his soul, and he had given her a world she never dared to dream of. "I look at you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I still cannot believe how lucky I am. The goddess took my world and then she gave it back to me, brighter and more beautiful than before." "We saved each other," Alara replied, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. The scar above his eye was just a part of the face she loved, a reminder of the battles he had fought. "You, me, and Leo, we are a pack. We are a family," he corrected gently. He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was filled with all the promise of their future. It was a kiss of shared dawns, of quiet nights, of ruling a kingdom side by side. It was the kiss of a king who had found his salvation in the heart of an Omega, and a queen who had found her power in the love of her family. When they broke apart, Leo giggled and clapped his small hands, nestled safely between them. The three of them stood together on the balcony, a king, a queen, and a prince, looking out over their peaceful kingdom. Alara had once been a forgotten ember, left to die in the cold. But the love of a king and the trust of his son had fanned her into a queen's fire, a brilliant, unwavering light that would warm their kingdom for generations to come. And so, the wolfless Omega who was cast out for an act of kindness became the kingdom's most beloved queen. Her story became a legend, a testament to the fact that true strength isn't measured by the power of your wolf, but by the size of your heart. She had faced down cruelty, fear, and assassins, not with claws and fangs, but with a fierce, unyielding courage that remade the world around her. Together with her king and their son, she ruled over an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity, proving that sometimes the greatest magic is not found in ancient prophecies or royal bloodlines, but in the simple, unbreakable bond of a family forged in the fires of adversity. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this story of courage, love, and redemption. If you were captivated by Alara's journey from a forgotten Omega to a powerful queen, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to bring you more stories just like this one. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a new adventure. We have to ask, what was your favorite moment of justice for Alara? Was it the sentencing of Alpha Marcus, or her confrontation with Lord Vorlag? Let me know in the comments below. We read every single one. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next story.